Where does yoga come from? The Vedic context continued. So we've had a look at this sheet that mentions the 6 darshanas and then some of these ancillary aspects of Vedic literature. A couple of the things I think are really important to mention in terms of the Vedic or Indic context which yoga is part of. There are some really foundational ideas that yoga assumes a familiarity with. We've mentioned some of these already. And we mentioned in last week's videos the 4 aims of life, the purushartha of artha, kama, dharma and moksha. And interestingly, artha, kama, dharma and moksha all have shastras, these codified bodies of knowledge associated with them. Artha Shastra is sometimes it gets translated as Indian economics or political science, the science of kings. It's quite vast, includes, for example, in my master's program, one of the sections of the Artha Shastra that I had to read was all about how a king has to manage his spies. So all the things that a king would need to know in order to be a good king, like how he has to have counselors and how he has to, surround himself with people who are experts, but also maintain some degree of independence, all that type of stuff. So the science of kings or queens, political science, economy. Artha, we mentioned, it's the means. So how to have good harvests, things to do with agriculture. Again, based on the Vedic understandings of how you can work skillfully with the seasons, with the soil, with the environment, all of those factors. So Artha Shastra, very inclusive to do with how we interact with the ecos. Karma, maybe you've heard of the Kama Sutra. There is also an Indian Shastra of aesthetics, as well as the whole realm of Kama Sutra about like living a fine life and having various types of pleasure. But there's also Indian schools and systems of aesthetics and beauty. Dharma Shastra refers to Indian law and jurisprudence, but Dharma in this context of the aims of life has a wider ambit, you might say. Dharma is the action which sustains. So as we mentioned previously, there's the idea in the Indian system that one should bring into balance artha, kama, dharma, moksha. That one can only become free when one lives responsibly in the world. But if one lives responsibly in the world and aligns one's actions such that they are dharma, such that they are in tune with one's true nature, and they support the well-being of the whole, then naturally one will move towards moksha. And the shastras of moksha are the schools of yoga and also other schools that share the same aim, such as the Vedantic schools and schools, for example, Buddhism or Jainism, also share that aim. As well as the 4 aims of life, another aspect of the Indic system that is definitely part of the context in which yoga grew up is the idea of 4 stages of life. So in the Orthodox Indian system, life is divided into 4 stages. The first stage is called Brahmacharya, and this is the time of learning, of studentship. And during Brahmacharya, one's commitment is to learn. One is a full-time student. One has no responsibility to produce or to take responsibility for other people. This is the time to be the student, to learn. Then there is the stage of the grihasta. So from the stage of studentship, one moves to the state of the grihasta, the householder. And now one assumes all sorts of responsibilities. The idea is that in the brahmacharya stage, it's like you learn the structure. You learn the method. It gets instilled into your cells so deeply that then when you take the stage of worldly responsibility, you're very thoroughly prepared. This is the idea. So in the grihasta stage, one typically marries and has children and contributes very dynamically to societal life. This grihastha stage continues. One's children go on to have children. And when one becomes a grandparent, there's this kind of natural then shift towards the third stage of life, what's called the vanaprastha. Now, vana means the forested area. Aranyaka means in Sanskrit, vana, let's say the wood. Not the deep, thick forest, not the wild forest. That's for the last stage of life. But the vanaprastha is this, now from being a householder living in the thick of life, of societal life, now you start to just live at one remove. So you live on the outskirts of town, in the more wooded area, for example. You go and live in a slightly quieter place. You're still involved with society, but you're a grandparent, you're an elder, so you're contributing to societal life, but the onus isn't on you to be the one that is doing the work in the fields, the one that is doing the labour, the one that is actively leading. You are the kind of revered counsellor. So you're still active, but you're starting to wind down, you might say. You're starting to take, your role is not quite so full on. So the grihastha stage, the idea is you're a young adult, in the natural scheme of things, you've got plenty of energy. So you've got all the natural resources you need to manage those complex responsibilities of helping children grow up into people who can also contribute wonderfully to the well-being of the broader society. And then after the vanaprastha, so you become a grandparent. Once your grandchildren then become grihasthas and householders, they're going to be starting to produce more kids. Then it's like, you've done your duty. You've contributed to the evolution of society. You've brought up your own children. You've been there to support your children, bringing up their children a little bit, to some degree, some significant degree perhaps. And now, job's done. You're free. And sannyasa, or the stage of renunciation, is the final stage of life. There's the idea that you've done everything. You've tasted all the flavors of life. You've lived fully. So now, you're ready to renounce everything. You're ready to give everything up and just focus on your own emancipation. So this is the Vedic and the traditional, Indian way. Back in the day, monks, nuns, very rare in Indian society. There's the idea that when you're young, you need to be helping the broader society. So first stage, they divide these, they say roughly these are like 25 years, 20 to 25 to 30 year periods. So the first stage of life, you're a student, you're an apprentice. Your job is to learn. And incidentally, traditionally speaking, during that time, one observes celibacy. And that only changes when one marries in the Orthodox Indian system, apparently. That's how it was thousands of years ago. And that's why sometimes people make the assumption that when they encounter the term brahmacharya, which is encountered in the Yoga Sutra, the term is there, that it means celibacy. But as we will see when we consider the Yoga Sutra, it doesn't mean celibacy in that context. It has a broader and more subtle, nuanced meaning. But during that stage of life, of brahmacharya, the studentship, your job is to study. You can imagine, let's say you're 16 years old and you are aflame for knowledge. Whatever things you're studying, you're really enjoying them. But then, he or she comes along. Now, if you enter into the erotic realm fully, what's going to happen to the fire of your ardent interest in the fields of knowledge you were so enthused about? Yes, we know that story, yes? That passion will be rerouted, redirected. So there's the idea that during that, in the traditional Indian system, one devotes all one's energies during that formative stage of life to studying. And incidentally, a young Indian person in the traditional system would learn all about eros and sexuality from a very young age. So the tantric teacher that I know, who I spent time with, he learnt all the techniques to retain the seminal fluid when he was 7 years old. So by the time that puberty happens, by the time that the hormones start to rage, he's already very, very practiced in the arts that mean he is not so susceptible to be impacted so severely by those hormonal rages, or those hormonal, surges rather, as somebody who's not been schooled in those arts and sciences. It was a very, very sophisticated culture, the ancient Indian system. But during that formative stage of life, one's job is to study. Then, during the time of being a householder, your job is to contribute very dynamically and wholeheartedly and fully to the well-being of society. Vanaprastha, you start to reduce your responsibilities, but you're still part of societal life. And then once your grandchildren are already kind of approaching adulthood, job's done, and it's time to renounce. Now, some of my Indian teachers have pointed out there is something very pragmatic about this approach. Like sometimes they say to young people, why are you chasing moksha? Why are you chasing liberation? And how are you going to renounce things you've never even tasted? Until you've had the world's responsibilities, how do you know you're free of them? You have to taste it all first to really be free, is what some people say. So in the traditional Indian system, there's the idea that one lives life fully. And yoga is about drinking deep from the cup of life. Because the idea is, if you can drink deep from the cup of life, you can learn to make every moment its own richness, its own reward, its own fullness, its own completion. There's the idea, if we can learn to drink deep from the cup of life, if we can learn to live each moment like it was our first chance to experience whatever we're experiencing, or it was our last chance to experience whatever we're experiencing, we would perhaps do it with such presence that we would leave no space for regret. So in a certain way we can stop creating the past, in the sense that we are in the action of the present moment so completely that we know at the end of the day we did it wholeheartedly. There's no space for regret. So, coming back to the idea of the 4 stages of life, there's the idea that if you devote yourself to learning, you set yourself up then to live as skillfully as you possibly can, deploying all this incredible burgeoning intelligence of childhood and adolescence to learning, one then moves into young adulthood very well equipped to then take on those responsibilities, because you've been training all the while. You know what's coming. You've got these role models of older people all around. So it's like the apprenticeship is on the job as well. It's not like you just learn in an abstract way. You're involved in society, but you are an apprentice. And then when you enter the realm of the household, then full responsibility. So the idea is that once you've done that, you've really explored the spectrum of life. And then when you become a vanaprastha, you become an elder, you start to take that one remove. You start to then make that transition out of the busyness of life. And I'm 42 and I don't have children. I never mind grandchildren. But some of my older friends who have reached these more advanced stages of life have spoken to me about how there is this natural inclination towards longings of the soul at the personal level rather than the longings of the family and the society in the way that they felt them when they were in their younger adulthood. People have said that to me. So the idea is that the Indian system, it's very practical, and it helps maintain the evolution of society and the evolution of life. So the young people, they don't go running off to the monastery. No, you need to work and support the well-being of the whole. So Buddhism is a rather curious phenomenon in the Indian system. So we'll speak about that later. But for now, I just wanted to kind of introduce that idea that there are these 4 stages of life, because it's something that you'll find if you start to read more around the Indian literature and yoga literature, you'll probably encounter this idea.